Bea, you have recently published a very interesting article on the perceived signs and effects of climate change. Now, your focus has been on the potential cultural similarities, even on a global scale. Tell us why this study is so unique.
Okay. Well, I think, first of all, what's interesting about studying climate change perception is that the way that people perceive climate change, so like you and me, citizens across the globe, that provides the context in which scientists, policymakers, politicians all have to operate. So that's why it's important to understand it. And there's been quite a lot of work done on perceptions of climate change that have been place-based, so studying those perceptions in particular locations. There have been surveys that have been broader, but they have tended to be primarily across similar countries, so English-speaking countries in cultural context, for example. And what has been lacking is a way to kind of link these place-based studies together. This is what we've tried to address in the study, really just using an old method, which is cultural consensus analysis from anthropology, to this new problem. So trying to link locally perceived signs and effects with global perceptions.
And what are the key findings?
Well, the key findings was quite striking and surprising to us. We were expecting to find cultural models, and when I say cultural models, it's basically the same as a mental model or a perception of signs and effect. We were expecting to see cultural models that were, one for Australia, one for Fiji, one for Ecuador, and so on. But instead, what we were finding was that the cultural model was more similar across all these sites than within them. And that's especially striking because the methodology that was used was a combination of ethnographic study, by which we derived initially the signs that people were perceiving of climate change, and that was done individually in each location. These were then compiled into what we call the cultural consensus questionnaire, and that was distributed across all the sites. And it was the analysis of that questionnaire that showed this emergence of a global model, in fact.
It sounds extremely interesting, but are there any implications about such a global climate model?
Well, I think, of course, the paper in itself doesn't go as far as to, talk about the implications. What the study really does is show that this methodology used in this way can provide data that allows us to think further about new hypotheses to test. But I think some of the key interesting questions that come up is that, okay, maybe we are seeing the emergence of a global model. Of course, we can't generalize just from this study. But if that is in fact the case, it's intuitive to think that that's something perhaps good. Global change climate change is a global problem that is often said to need global solutions, global governance, and so on. So if there is a narrative emerging where citizens across the globe agree, perhaps that's good for engendering a sense of urgency and political will. But you could turn the coin around and say that, is it so that we are seeing the emergence of a narrative around signs and effects of climate change that is becoming so generalized that it doesn't anymore hold an emotional value to me, and it doesn't engender that sense of kind of urgency for me, then that could also be a problem. We won't know that until we're able to link those kinds of questions to actual behavioral change or behavior, which we of course don't do, but something that I hope is done in the future.